There is a particular kind of silence that exists only in certain forests, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something deeper, something older. If you have ever walked through the ancient groves of the Pacific Northwest, through the towering redwoods of California, or along the forgotten botanical corridors of the American South, you may have felt it, that strange sensation that the trees themselves are listening, that the earth beneath your feet remembers something you have forgotten: heat, humidity, the thick air of a Louisiana summer pressing against your skin like a question. Somewhere in the distance, a mockingbird calls. But there is another sound too, a frequency beneath the birdsong, a vibration you feel more than hear, the kind of resonance that makes the hair on your arm stand up, even when you cannot explain why. This is where our story begins, not in the laboratories of modern science, not in the gleaming towers of contemporary botany, but in the forgotten gardens of a civilization that understood something we have lost. A civilization that did not merely cultivate plants, but communicated with them. A civilization that built living architecture from root and branch, from flower and vine. A civilization whose botanical engineering was so advanced, so integrated with the natural world, that when it was erased, the evidence hid itself in plain sight. The official history tells us that American horticulture began with European colonization, that the great botanical gardens of the 19th century were innovations imported from the Old World, that the massive greenhouses and elaborate plant collections that appeared across the United States between 1840 and 1890 were the products of Victorian ambition and industrial progress. This is what we are taught. This is what we are expected to believe. But the photographs tell a different story. I first encountered the anomaly 3 years ago while researching the history of American botanical gardens for an entirely different project. I was examining a collection of photographs from the 1876 Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia when something caught my attention. In the background of an image showing the horticultural hall, there was a structure I did not recognize. A greenhouse, yes, but of a design I had never seen before. The glass panels seemed to curve in impossible ways. The iron framework appeared almost organic, as if the metal itself had grown into those shapes rather than being forged. I dismissed it at first. A trick of the light. An artifact of the old photographic process. But the image stayed with me. And when I began to look more closely at other photographs from the same period, I started to notice a pattern. The botanical structures of 19th century America were not what they appeared to be. In photograph after photograph, from San Francisco to New York, from New Orleans to Chicago, I found evidence of greenhouses and conservatories that defied the technological capabilities of their era. Structures that should not have existed, gardens that seemed to operate on principles that modern botany still does not fully understand. Consider the Palm House at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden as it appeared in photographs from 1889. The official records tell us it was constructed using standard Victorian engineering techniques, iron and glass, steam heating, nothing remarkable. But look closely at the earliest images. Look at the way the plants are arranged. Look at the relationship between the root systems and the building's foundations. There is something there that does not match the official story. The plants are not merely growing in the structure, they appear to be part of it. I know how this sounds. I know that the rational mind resists such observations. We are trained to dismiss what does not fit our understanding of the world. We are conditioned to explain away anomalies, to smooth over contradictions, to maintain the comfortable narrative of linear progress. But the more I researched, the more the evidence accumulated. The hanging gardens of 19th century America were not built by the people who claimed to have built them. They were inherited. The term itself, hanging gardens, carries a resonance that extends far beyond its literal meaning. We think of Babylon, of course, the legendary gardens that ancient historians described as one of the 7 wonders of the world. Gardens that supposedly rose in terraces above the city, watered by sophisticated irrigation systems, filled with plants from every corner of the known world. Gardens that, according to mainstream archaeology, may never have existed at all. But what if the hanging gardens of Babylon were not unique? What if they were merely one example of a global system of botanical engineering that once spanned continents? What if the evidence of that system still exists, hidden in the gardens and greenhouses that dot the American landscape, waiting to be recognized for what they truly are? This is not speculation. This is a pattern that emerges from the evidence itself. Between 1850 and 1890, over 300 major botanical structures appeared across the United States. Conservatories, greenhouses, tropical houses, palm houses, structures of unprecedented scale and complexity, built with materials and techniques that, according to official history, should not have been available at the time. The conventional explanation is that these were the products of rapid industrialization, of American ingenuity and European expertise combined. But the timeline does not support this explanation. Many of these structures appeared almost simultaneously in cities separated by thousands of miles, at a time when communication was slow and transportation slower. They share architectural features that suggest a common origin, a unified design philosophy, as if they were all built according to the same blueprint. And the plants they housed, many of which were supposedly imported from distant tropical regions, seemed to thrive in conditions that should have been impossible to maintain with the technology of the era. The photographs from this period reveal something else too. Something that is rarely discussed in official histories of American horticulture. The gardens were already mature. This is perhaps the most troubling anomaly of all. In photograph after photograph, the botanical collections of 19th century America appear fully established from the moment they first appear in the historical record. Trees that should have taken decades to reach their documented heights. Root systems that should have required generations to develop, ecosystems that should have needed centuries to achieve the level of integration visible in these early images. We are told that these gardens were planted by industrious Victorian horticulturists, that the trees were imported as saplings and grew with remarkable speed, that the complex relationships between different plant species developed naturally over the few years between a garden's founding and its first photographic documentation. But this does not match what we know about how plants grow. It does not match what we know about how ecosystems develop. It does not match what we see in the photographs themselves. The hanging gardens of 19th century America were not planted. They were discovered. I want to be careful here. I am not claiming to have all the answers. I am not proposing a complete alternative history of American horticulture. What I am doing is following the evidence where it leads, asking the questions that the official narrative does not answer, and inviting you to look at the photographs for yourself. Because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Once you notice the impossible maturity of these gardens, the advanced engineering of their structures, the strange integration between plant and architecture, you begin to wonder. You begin to ask the questions that have been suppressed for over a century. Who really built the hanging gardens of America? What technology did they use? And why has their existence been erased from our collective memory? In the chapters that follow, we will explore these questions in depth. We will examine specific gardens and structures across the United States, from the forgotten conservatories of the South to the mysterious groves of the Pacific coast. We will look at the evidence that suggests these botanical wonders were part of a global system of biological engineering, a system that operated on principles we are only beginning to rediscover. And we will consider why this knowledge was suppressed, who benefited from its erasure, and what it might mean for our understanding of history itself. But first, I want to take you to a place where the evidence is particularly clear. A place where the hanging gardens of Tartaria left traces that even the most determined efforts at erasure could not completely eliminate. New Orleans, 1884, the world's industrial and cotton centennial exposition. The official history tells us that the horticultural hall of the 1884 exposition was the largest conservatory ever built in the United States at that time. Over 600 feet long, nearly 200 feet wide, filled with tropical plants from around the world. A triumph of American engineering and horticultural expertise. The photographs tell a different story. In images captured during the exposition's opening months, the horticultural hall appears not as a new construction, but as an ancient structure that has been cleaned and renovated. The iron framework shows signs of weathering that would require decades to develop. The glass panels, supposedly manufactured specifically for the exposition, bear patterns that suggest a much longer history. And the plants inside, those magnificent palms and ferns and tropical flowers, display growth patterns that would be impossible to achieve in the few months between the building's supposed construction and its public opening. Look at the root systems visible through the glass floor panels. Look at the integration between plant and structure, the way certain vines appear to have grown through the iron framework itself. Look at the symmetry, the geometric precision, the sense of organic design that permeates every aspect of the building. This was not built in 1884. This was revealed in 1884. The Horticultural Hall of New Orleans is just one example, one fragment of a much larger pattern. In the chapters to come, we will trace this pattern across the American landscape, from coast to coast, from the gardens of the past to the remnants that still exist in the present. But as we begin this journey, I want to leave you with a thought, a question that has guided my research from the very beginning. What if the hanging gardens of Tartaria were not just gardens? What if they were something more? What if they were living machines, biological technologies that serve purposes we can barely imagine? What if the plants themselves were engineered, designed to perform functions that we have forgotten how to recognize? The silence beneath the canopy is not empty. It is full of questions, questions that have been waiting for over a century for someone to ask them. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. If you want to discover the hidden history that has been deliberately erased from our collective memory, if you want to see the evidence that mainstream academia refuses to acknowledge, then make sure you're part of this journey. Subscribe now, because what comes next will change everything you thought you knew about the past. Imagine standing inside a structure made entirely of glass and iron. Above you, the sky is visible through thousands of individual panes, each one catching the light at a slightly different angle, creating a kaleidoscope of reflections that seems to shift and breathe with the movement of the clouds. Around you, plants of every description rise from carefully arranged beds, their leaves reaching toward the light, their roots extending into soil that has been prepared according to principles you do not fully understand. The air is warm, humid, filled with the scent of growing things. And beneath it all, beneath the visible surface of this extraordinary space, there is a vibration, a frequency, a sense of energy moving through the structure in ways that defy the laws of physics as you understand them. This is what it would have been like to stand inside one of America's great 19th century conservatories. This is what the photographs suggest, even if they cannot fully capture the experience, and this is what we have lost. The conventional history of American conservatories begins in Europe. We are told that the great glass houses of England and France inspired American architects to create their own versions, adapting European designs to American conditions and American materials. The Palm House at Kew Gardens, completed in 1848, is often cited as the prototype for all subsequent conservatory construction. The Crystal Palace, built for the Great Exhibition of 1851, demonstrated the possibilities of iron and glass architecture on a scale never before attempted. This narrative makes sense. It fits our understanding of how technology spreads, how ideas move from one culture to another, how progress builds upon previous achievements. But there are problems with this narrative, problems that become apparent when you examine the evidence closely. The first problem is the timeline. American conservatories did not gradually develop from European models. They appeared almost fully formed, within a span of just a few decades, in locations scattered across the continent with no apparent connection to each other. The San Francisco Conservatory of Flowers, the New York Crystal Palace, the conservatories of Chicago, St. Louis, Philadelphia, and dozens of smaller cities. All of them sharing architectural features that suggest a common origin, yet built at a time when such coordination would have been extremely difficult to achieve. The second problem is the scale. Many American conservatories were larger than their supposed European predecessors, more complex, more ambitious. The Horticultural Hall of the 1876 Centennial Exhibition covered nearly 2 acres. The conservatories that appeared across the American South in the 1880s housed plant collections that would have taken decades to assemble using conventional methods. How could American architects with less experience than their European counterparts consistently produce larger and more sophisticated structures? The third problem is the plants themselves. Consider what it would have taken to stock a large conservatory in 19th century America. You would need to acquire tropical plants from distant regions, places like Southeast Asia, Central America, the Pacific Islands. You would need to transport these plants across oceans, keeping them alive during voyages that could last months. You would need to acclimatize them to their new environment, nursing them through the shock of transition. And then you would need to cultivate them year after year until they reached the impressive sizes visible in contemporary photographs. This process, according to modern botanical science, should have taken generations. The great palm trees visible in photographs from the 1880s should not have been there. The complex ecosystems depicted in these images should not have existed. The integration between different plant species, the symbiotic relationships, the apparent maturity of these collections, none of it makes sense within the conventional timeline, unless the plants were not imported, unless the collections were not assembled, unless the gardens were already there, waiting to be discovered, waiting to be claimed by those who would take credit for their creation. I began to research the origins of American conservatory plants several months into my investigation. What I found confirmed my suspicions. The official records were incomplete. The shipping manifests were inconsistent. The timelines did not match. But more importantly, I found something else. In the archives of several botanical gardens, hidden among routine correspondence and administrative documents, there were references to plants that were not imported, but found. Plants that were discovered growing in locations where they should not have existed. Plants that appeared to be remnants of a much older cultivation. The glass cathedrals of 19th century America were not built to house imported specimens. They were built to preserve what was already there, to protect the last fragments of a botanical heritage that was disappearing, to maintain the illusion that these wonders were new, when in fact they were ancient. And this brings us to the question that haunts every aspect of this investigation. If these gardens were not created by Victorian horticulturists, who did create them? What civilization possessed the knowledge to engineer plants on such a scale? And why did that civilization disappear, leaving only these silent green monuments behind? The answer, I believe, lies not in the gardens themselves, but in the soil beneath them. in the frequencies that still resonate through their structures, in the patterns that connect them across thousands of miles. The answer lies in Tartaria. There is a principle in physics that governs the behavior of all matter: resonance, the tendency of objects to vibrate at certain frequencies, to respond to specific wavelengths of energy. We understand this principle when it comes to sound, to light, to electromagnetic radiation. But what if the same principle applies to life itself? What if plants, like all living things, respond to frequencies that we have forgotten how to perceive? This is not speculation. This is science. Modern research has demonstrated that plants respond to sound waves, that certain frequencies can accelerate growth, enhance flowering, even alter the chemical composition of leaves and stems. The phenomenon is called sonic bloom, and it has been documented in laboratories around the world. But the researchers who study sonic bloom treat it as a discovery, a new frontier in agricultural science. They do not realize that they are rediscovering something that was known long ago, something that was practiced on a scale we can barely imagine. The hanging gardens of Tartaria were not merely collections of plants. They were instruments, living machines designed to harness and transmit specific frequencies. The architecture of the conservatories, those impossible curves of iron and glass, was not decorative. It was functional. Each structure was designed to resonate at particular wavelengths, to create acoustic environments that would optimize plant growth and maintain the health of the botanical ecosystem. This is why the plants in 19th century photographs appear so impossibly mature. This is why the ecosystem seems so perfectly integrated. The gardens were not grown in the conventional sense. They were tuned, calibrated, harmonized with frequencies that modern science is only beginning to understand. Consider the acoustic properties of the great conservatories. The curved glass panels, the iron framework that conducts vibration, the water features that were present in nearly every structure, creating patterns of sound and moisture that would have enhanced the resonant properties of the space. None of this was accidental. All of it was designed. I found evidence of this acoustic engineering in the most unexpected places. In the architectural plans of conservatories that were never supposed to have such sophisticated features. In the placement of ventilation systems that seemed designed to create specific air currents, specific patterns of sound. In the positioning of water tanks and fountains that would have generated particular frequencies throughout the structure. The engineers who built these conservatories, or who claimed to have built them, did not understand what they were working with. They followed blueprints without comprehending their purpose. They maintained systems without knowing why those systems were necessary. And over time, as the original knowledge was lost, the acoustic properties of the gardens degraded, the frequencies faded, the resonance disappeared. This is why so many of these structures eventually failed, not because of age or neglect, but because the essential principle of their operation had been forgotten. The plants continued to grow, but they no longer thrived. The ecosystems continued to function, but they lost their extraordinary vitality. The gardens became mere shadows of what they had once been. I am standing now in what remains of one of these gardens, a conservatory in the American South that has been partially restored, though its restorers do not understand its true nature. The glass has been replaced, the iron has been repaired, but the resonance is gone. The frequency that once filled this space has been silenced, and yet if you stand very still, if you quiet your mind and open your senses, you can almost feel it. A ghost of vibration, a memory of sound, the last echo of a technology that once made these gardens sing. If you are feeling something right now, something you cannot quite name, something that resonates in your chest and makes you want to pause this video and simply sit with what you have heard, then I want you to do something. I want you to leave a comment. Write these words: I can still hear the frequency. Because I believe that those who are drawn to this story, those who feel the truth of what I am describing, share something, a sensitivity, an awareness, a connection to the knowledge that was lost. Leave that comment. Let me know that you are out there. Let me know that I am not alone in this search. Who were they? This is the question that has driven my research from the very beginning. Who were the people who built the Hanging Gardens? Who possessed the knowledge to engineer plants on a continental scale? Who understood the frequencies of growth, the resonance of living systems, the principles that modern science is only now beginning to rediscover? The official history offers no answers. The official history does not even acknowledge that the question exists. But the evidence points in a direction that most historians are unwilling to consider. The evidence points to Tartaria. I use this word carefully. I know that it carries associations, that it has been dismissed by mainstream academia as pseudo-history and conspiracy. But I am not interested in labels. I am interested in evidence. And the evidence suggests that before the current age, before the nations and empires that we recognize from our textbooks, there existed a civilization of extraordinary sophistication. A civilization that understood the relationship between energy and matter, between frequency and form, between consciousness and the living world. This civilization did not build monuments of dead stone. They built living architecture, gardens that breathed, structures that grew, systems that maintained themselves through principles of resonance and harmony. They did not dominate nature, they collaborated with it. They did not extract resources, they cultivated relationships. The Hanging Gardens of America were part of this system, one node in a global network of botanical engineering that once spanned the entire planet. From the legendary gardens of Babylon to the mysterious groves of Southeast Asia, from the forgotten conservatories of Europe to the vast agricultural systems of pre-colonial America, this network maintained the health and vitality of the living world. And then something happened. The records are unclear, the evidence is fragmentary. But sometime in the middle of the 19th century, this system began to collapse. The frequencies that had sustained the gardens for generations began to fade. The resonance that connected them across continents began to weaken. The knowledge that had been passed down through countless generations began to be forgotten. What caused this collapse? Some researchers believe it was a natural catastrophe, a shift in the Earth's magnetic field, a change in the frequencies that the gardens depended upon. Others suggest a more deliberate cause, a decision made by someone or something to silence the gardens, to erase the evidence of a civilization that did not fit the emerging narrative of industrial progress. I do not know which explanation is correct. Perhaps both contain elements of truth. But what I do know is that by the 1880s, the Hanging Gardens of America were already dying. The people who took credit for their creation were actually presiding over their decline. The great conservatories and botanical halls that appeared across the country were not new constructions, they were preservation efforts, attempts to maintain what remained of a system that was already failing. This explains so much that the official history cannot. It explains why the gardens appeared so suddenly and so uniformly. It explains why the plants seemed impossibly mature from the very beginning. It explains why so many of these structures failed within a few decades of their supposed construction. It explains the melancholy that pervades the photographs from this period, the sense of loss that is visible in the faces of the people who tended these gardens. They knew. On some level, they knew that they were witnessing the end of something. The last chapter of a story that had begun long before their civilization existed, and now, over a century later, we are left with the fragments. The ruins of greenhouses that once sang with frequencies we can no longer hear. The descendants of plants that were once part of living machines we can no longer comprehend. The echoes of a knowledge that was deliberately erased, hidden beneath layers of official history and academic dismissal. But the evidence remains. The patterns persist. And for those who know how to look, the hanging gardens of Tartaria are still visible, still present, still waiting to be recognized for what they truly are. They are still here. The gardens, the plants, the descendants of a biological engineering that predates our civilization by centuries, perhaps millennia. They exist in botanical gardens across the country, mislabeled as Victorian imports. They grow in private estates and forgotten greenhouses, their true nature unrecognized. They persist in the wild places, in forests and swamps and mountain valleys, where the frequencies still resonate, however faintly. I have spent the past year visiting these sites, documenting what remains, listening for the frequencies that once filled these spaces, and what I have found has convinced me that the story of the Hanging Gardens is not merely historical. It is ongoing, it is present, it is alive. In Northern California, there is a grove of redwoods that does not appear in any official record. Local residents know of its existence, but they do not speak of it to outsiders. The trees in this grove are older than any documented specimens of their species. Their arrangement suggests deliberate cultivation, and when you stand among them, when you quiet your breathing and still your thoughts, you can feel it. That resonance, that frequency, the unmistakable sensation of a living system that is still somehow functioning. In Louisiana, there is a garden hidden behind a crumbling plantation house. The family that owns the property does not know its history. They believe the garden was planted by their ancestors in the early 20th century. But the plants in this garden include species that should not exist in this climate, species that have no documented history of cultivation in the American South. Species that, according to botanical science, should have died out long ago. In upstate New York, there is a conservatory that has been abandoned for over 50 years. The glass is broken, the iron is rusted. The plants inside should have died decades ago. But they have not died. They have continued to grow, adapting to conditions that should be impossible, creating an ecosystem that defies everything we think we know about botanical science. These are not isolated cases. They are part of a pattern that becomes visible only when you know what to look for. The Hanging Gardens of Tartaria did not disappear completely. They retreated, they adapted, they found ways to survive in a world that had forgotten them. And they are waiting for the knowledge to return, waiting for the frequencies to be restored, waiting for someone to recognize them for what they truly are. I believe that recognition is beginning. I believe that the research being conducted in laboratories around the world, the discoveries being made about plant communication and sonic bloom, and the electromagnetic sensitivity of living systems, is leading us back to the knowledge that was lost. Not because we are discovering something new, but because we are remembering something ancient. The Hanging Gardens of Tartaria were not destroyed. They were merely silenced. And silence, as anyone who has stood in a forest at dawn can tell you, is never permanent. It is always waiting to be filled. We have traveled far together, through the glass cathedrals of the 19th century, through the frequencies of growth that once filled these spaces, through the evidence of a civilization that understood principles we are only beginning to rediscover. And now we arrive at the end of this journey, or perhaps more accurately, at a new beginning. The Hanging Gardens of Tartaria were real. The biological engineering they represented was real. The knowledge that created them was real. And though that knowledge was suppressed, though the gardens were silenced, though the history was erased, the truth remains, written in the growth patterns of ancient plants, encoded in the architecture of forgotten conservatories, preserved in the frequencies that still resonate, however faintly, in the living world around us. I want to leave you with an image, a moment I experienced during my research that captures everything I have been trying to convey. I was standing in the ruins of a conservatory in the deep south. The year was last summer. The heat was oppressive, the air thick with humidity and the songs of cicadas. The building had been abandoned for decades. The roof had partially collapsed. Plants had grown up through the broken floor, reclaiming the space that had once been theirs. And as I stood there, as the light filtered through the remaining glass panels and cast patterns on the overgrown floor, I heard it. A sound, a frequency, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the plants themselves, from the roots beneath my feet, from the very air I was breathing. It lasted only a moment, a few seconds at most, but in that moment I understood. The gardens remember, the plants remember. The frequencies that once connected them across continents, that once maintained the health and vitality of the living world, are still there, waiting, listening, ready to be reawakened. This is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter that we are writing together, you and I, every time we ask questions that the official history cannot answer. Every time we look at the world around us with new eyes. Every time we feel that strange resonance, that inexplicable connection to something larger than ourselves. The hanging gardens of Tartaria were silenced, but they were not destroyed. The knowledge that created them was suppressed, but it was not lost. And now, in this moment, in this age of rediscovery, we have the opportunity to remember, to reconnect, to restore what was taken from us. The gardens are waiting, the frequencies are there. All we have to do is listen. If you watched this far, it is because you felt something, because something in this story resonated with a part of you that you may not have known existed. If that is true, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below saying, "I watched this far." Let me know that you completed this journey. Let me know who you are, because the people who watch until the end, who stay with the story through all its twists and revelations, are the people I want to know. You are the community that is being built around this channel. You are the ones who will carry this knowledge forward. And if this video moved you, if it opened your eyes to possibilities you had never considered, please take a moment to like and share it. Every like tells the algorithm that this content matters. Every share brings another person into this community of seekers. Together, we can ensure that these stories reach the people who need to hear them. Subscribe to this channel if you have not already. Turn on notifications so you never miss a video, because this is only the beginning. There are more gardens to explore, more frequencies to discover, more history to uncover. The silence is breaking, the gardens are waking, and we are here to witness it.